Hello, my name is Kelsey Carter, and today I'll be presenting a phylogeny of fishes, a 530 million year swim. Some contents we'll hit today are an introduction of the first fishes and their phylogeny, morphology, habitat, and physiology, and we'll address some questions about their diversity and distribution and their evolution, including feeding and reproduction, and follow with a discussion of each of these. So to start, I want to orient you to the geological timescale on the right. And our discussion of the first fishes come after vertebrates develop during the Cambrian explosion around 530 million years ago. Here we see the development of jawless fish, or agnatha, and a representative picture of what these probably looked like. And they have no paired fins, no defined stomach, and they don't have true gills yet, but they do have 7 or more gill pouches. And they share a common ancestor with tunicates. And if you needed any more convincing that evolution is wild and super cool, this is what a tunicate looks like. So, what? But after these, we jump into the Ordovicene, mass extinction, and Silurian periods, where we see the development of jawed fishes, or gnathostomata. And these fish had cartilaginous endoskeletons, but bony, placky, thoracic, and head shape. And they also had true teeth. We see the development of paired fins, true stomachs, and gill slits. And our next big split in the evolutionary tree happens around the same time in the late Silurian, with the development of chondrichthyes, or cartilaginous fish, such as skates and rays, and osteoichthyons, or bony fish. And diving a little deeper into this evolutionary tree, we again see here at the top that we have our vertebrate development, our jawless fish, and then our jawed fish. And inside of our jawless fish, a large majority of these are extinct, though there are living species today, including the hagfish and lampreys. And if you're wondering what a hagfish is, it's this really creepy looking thing. And if you're wondering what a lamprey is, it's this even creepier looking thing. But as you can see, interestingly, these fish don't have scales, they don't have fins, and they don't have vertebrates actually. We've discussed our split of jawed fish and those placoderms that are extinct, and that next evolutionary split between cartilaginous and bony fish. And then there's an even deeper split of bony fish between sarcopterygians, or lobed fin fish, and actinopterygians and ray fin fish. And the majority of our talk will focus here on actinopterygians, as they comprise about half of all vertebrate species and 96% of fishes. And diving farther into those actinopterygians, hopefully with this phylogenetic tree, you can appreciate that there are many evolutionary and genetic splits here, as well as morphologies and phenotypic adaptations. And we can zero in on the acanthopterygians, which evolved about 133 to 152 million years ago and comprise of about a third of all living vertebrates. They're found nearly in every aquatic habitat, and they have this huge morphological disparity that takes off between the Cretaceous, Paleogene, and early Eocene periods. And you can see that morphological disparity here between the very smallest fish and the largest bony fish, the mullet or sunfish. Taking a deeper dive here, we can look at Percomorpha. Percomorphs, sorry, my cat's here, show exceptional species richness within the acanthomorphs. They exhibit something called hard polytomy, which is when an evolutionary event results in multiple speciations that are occurring very rapidly, if not simultaneously. And there's also adaptive radiation happening here, where groups of organisms quickly diversify when they exploit new available ecological niches that are left through these extinction events. Onto morphology, physiology, and habitat. There are some really typical things that we think of when we think of fish. Probably like the body form you're seeing here on the left, where they have dorsal fins, pelvic fins, anal fins, caudal or tail fins. We've got gills, these guys are having scales, they're swimming in freshwater, saltwater, or brackish water where the two meet. They're largely ectotherms and they are egg layers. But there are exceptions to every single one of these defining characteristics. Lungfish, for example, have lungs that they breathe with. Hagfish aren't vertebrates and they have no scales. Tuna are warm-blooded. Sharks and rays will actually exhibit oviviparity, and hammerheads are viviparous, laying live birth. And then we even have the honorable male seahorse, which broods their eggs in their trunk or tail pouch, and some even have live birth there. Great example here is the mud skipper, who waddles on land with its fins and spends quite a bit of time breathing air on land. Is crazy. So, some questions we can address here are whether marine or freshwater habitats are more species rich. What are the geomorphological drivers of diversity and distribution? And which environmental pressures result in relatively recent diversification events? Taking a look at habitat, the ocean comprises 96.5% of the total global water, and freshwater only 2.5%. And of that 2.5%, a majority of that freshwater is contained in groundwater or glaciers and ice caps, though that's changing with climate. But the ocean makes up 90 to 90% of the volume of the inhabitable biosphere, but it houses only a fraction of the diversity that we see terrestrially. Researchers Greta Vega and John Wines in 2012 used phylogenetics to investigate the diversity of actinopterygian or rayfin fishes in salt versus freshwater habitats to determine their implications for explaining this overall disparity between the diversity on land versus sea. And interestingly, they found that there was no difference in the number of species in freshwater habitats versus saltwater. And you can see that here in the top right of this figure, that freshwater fish comprise of over 15,000 species and saltwater just under. Additionally, they found that species richness in both environments were dominated by two relatively recent clades, and those are the Asteriophycines and the Percomorphs we previously discussed. The Asteriophycines are made up of 99% freshwater fish and just 1% marine, where the Percomorphs are made up of 69% saltwater fish. And Asteriophycines are 61% of all freshwater species, and they emerged about 150 million years ago, where Percomorphs are making up 77% of marine species, and they emerged about 111 million years ago. Very interestingly, all living marine actinopterygians derived from ancient freshwater lineages, which is wild, but we do see that some predominantly freshwater clades have marine ancestors too, so there is a lot of habitat crossover happening here over evolutionary history. Additionally, inside of these habitats, fresh and marine, there are high diversity niches, and these include things like rivers and streams, wetlands, caves for freshwater, coral reefs, benthic and pelagic zones, and even polar zones in marine. And there are also low diversity regions inside of these habitats, and low diversity biomes are a product of extreme environments that require extreme adaptations. In freshwater, we can think of really tectonically active regions that are going to cause land separation and body water separation, reducing the ability for gene flow and dispersal. Glacial highlands, where this Atlantic char you see on the bottom is well adapted for cold water, but also water-stressed regions, which are unfortunately often a product of human impact through deforestation and urbanization. In saltwater, we have a lot of extreme environments. So the Dead Sea has high salinity, and in fact, no fish live there or plants. Arctic regions, you have to be very adapted for extreme cold, or the deep ocean where there's a lack of light and high pressure, or like this pink vent fish, this handsome guy on the right, living in extreme temperatures of the deep thermal vents. Distribution also plays a part in this. So diversity hotspots are driven by landscape dynamics. And you can see here on the right that in the US, where the Appalachian tectonic activity has been stable for a long time, we see high diversity across this heterogeneous habitat diversity too. And tropical river basins are the most specious regions for freshwater fishes. And Casimiro et al. In 2022 found documented acceleration in net lineage diversification just 20 million years ago through today. And this period corresponds with intensification of tectonic activity and major river network reconfigurations. These regions, like in the Amazonian here, are so species rich because they are well connected through flooding events that connect floodplains and rivers, increasing feeding and breeding opportunities. They also tend to be very stable environments over evolutionary history and again provide a lot of habitat heterogeneity. In the marine environment, we can really see this highlighted in a region called the Coral Triangle, which comprises a lot of Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and parts of Australia, where over 3,000 reef species live. This is attributable to a vast range of habitats, and also that islands are a current protector, where typically current is strong coming onto an island, but as it flows off of each side, the back side of the island provides protection for larval stages to settle and survive to adulthood. And additionally, the deep to shallow transition in water is very proximal. So as sea levels shift, there's minimal disruptive dispersal happening in these regions. Another great example of high diversity are the Hawaiian Islands, where about 90% of native species are also endemic to the islands. And this is attributable to the extreme isolation and also the volcanic events that caused sequential island formation provided a new environmental canvas for population and adaptation each time one arose. And my favorite endemic fish in Hawaii is the saddleback wrasse, which produces a mucosal layer with SPF, and they can actually change the amount of this mucus or SPF factor depending on how deep or shallow they live, and they also like to nip at your hair and fins when you swim around them. We can further see some great diversity adaptations through feeding and dental adaptations. So dental and dietary changes through extinction pressures increased diversification. And if we look at this figure on the left from Korn et al., you see that feeding type is colored. The colors correspond to feeding type, and the majority of this evolutionary tree is suction feeding in blue. But then you see this big spike in diversity. And what they found was that the end of the Cretaceous mass extinction preceded growth of bite-feeding teleosts, which are inside of the actinopterygian ray fin fish, and that this increased body morphology diversity. And in fact, they say that the ancestors of modern reef fish use almost exclusively suction prior to the Cenozoic, but today, 40% of species use some degree of biting. And you can see in this table that biting mixed with suctioning or ram biting are really recent adaptations compared to suction. Mating. There are a lot of mating and parental strategies used by fishes, and this list is not all-inclusive, but just to hit a few important ones, the most common ancestral mode of mating in fish, and primarily marine fish, is broodcast spawning, where eggs and sperm are both released into the water and fertilization is going to happen externally in the water column. Advantages to this are that a huge number of gametes are produced and there's rapid dispersal, but a disadvantage is that there's low survival and no parental control over that survival. However, this type of mating sets the baseline for later innovations in mating systems, including paired spawning or lekking, where reef fish and cichlids display male territory and arenas. They're decorating to attract the ladies. That's lekking. You can see it here in this picture. There's also always cuckoldry in nature, so males will sneak in fertilizations of nests that are defended by other dominant males. Sometimes they'll even pretend to be females to sneak in there. And then there's a wide range of parental care, including male-only parental care, which is common in nest guarding fishes like sticklebacks, or female-only care, which is actually really rare. And then you get biparental care in cichlids. You can also have sex role reversals, so the cygnathids or pipefish and seahorse. The males exclusively are the parental figure in these types of fish, and they'll brood the eggs in their little trunk pouches or tails, and some even give actual birth. You also see sex change and hermaphroditism in fish. Some current evolutionary pressures for these animals are climate change, including ice melting, sea level rise, sea temperature rise, and habitat loss. You also see human-driven habitat fragmentation and land use through dam construction. This results in dispersal limitation, and actually freshwater fish are one of the most threatened groups of animals due to river regulation, dam construction, land use, hydropower development, climate change, lots of stuff we're doing. Also, overfishing is going to alter feeding strategies and mating strategies and reduce apex predation. We also see pollution, such as microplastics. But in conclusion, it's really hard for me to wrap this up because I could talk about fish all day. Extant or living marine and freshwater diversity is comparable. Species persist and bloom through extinction events, and fish adapt a variety of morphologies and physiologies, as well as breeding strategies and habitat niches in response to these evolutionary pressures. And humans are definitely increasing these pressures. So, some of my favorite fish and fish facts. Here we see a manta ray, and their little speckles on the ventral side of their bodies are akin to our thumbprints, so you can identify every individual manta ray by their spots. Also, some fish are very well adapted for camouflage, so if you can spot the fish here just above that urchin, this is a red frogfish, and these guys actually bumble around on their pelvic and pectoral fins when they move. And yeah, they're hard to find, so it's very cool when you find one. My favorite fish, the juvenile yellow boxfish. They bebop around with these tiny oscillating fins, and they look like terrible swimmers, but they're actually very well adapted for fitting through coral nooks and crannies. My ultimate conclusion is that fish are very cool, and that you should go diving and see some because it will change your life. Thank you for listening, and here are my references.